Hello everyone, Colin Cadet here for Woodworkeb. Today, in 5 minutes, I'm going to tell you what I know about purchasing inexpensive power tools, both battery and plug into the wall. One of the fun things is being able to go out and buy tools from time to time. And you know, as much as we always like to go out and buy the best quality tools we can, sometimes we can't afford always the best quality tools, and sometimes we're buying tools that we're going to be using pretty infrequently and that we want to be saving some money on and not buying necessarily the best. And there's a lot of things to look at when you're buying tools. Before you purchase any tools, whether they're inexpensive tools or expensive tools, there's two things that you should know before you leave the store. And the first thing is, what is the warranty on this tool? How long, how many days or months or years? What is the warranty? And the second thing is, what is the return policy to that store? And the reason that's important is because, particularly with less expensive tools, there is something called an out-of-box failure. And what that means is you get the tool home, you take it out of the box, and it doesn't work right out of the box. And that happens with some regularity, but the people that you bought it from may not necessarily know that. They may think you've used the tool. You don't know. They don't know that. So you need to find out what the return policy is. Do you have to return it to the manufacturer, or can you take it back to the store? Very important questions. Now, the next question you might want to ask yourself, do I want a tool that is battery operated, or can I use a tool that's a plug into the wall? And you need to know what you're using this tool for. This little drill, I love this little drill, but it's only a 12-volt drill. And I do a fair bit of pocket hole joinery. And this little drill, although it can do them, depending on the wood, it bogs this little drill down. So for that, I have to use my more powerful drill that plugs into the wall, because I can't be recharging batteries all the time to try and drill some pocket holes. So you need to think about what it is that you're going to do. If you're going to be doing a lot of pocket hole joinery, a 12 volt is probably not sufficient. You're probably going to want a 14 or maybe even an 18 volt, because you're going to need more power. So when you're choosing tools, whether they're plug-in or battery operated, you need to think as a woodworker, what tools am I going to be using a lot, and what tools am I going to be using infrequently? For example, you're going to be using drills, whether they're battery operated or corded. You're going to be using sanders quite a bit, routers a fair bit. You're probably not going to use a multi-tool very much. You're probably not going to use a reciprocating saw very much. You're probably not going to use a grinder very much. And you're probably not even going to use a belt sander a whole lot. The tools that you are going to use a lot, a sander, different sanders, all sorts of things. You're going to be using a circular saw quite a bit. So those are the kind of things that you're probably going to want to spend a little bit more money to get a little bit better quality on. The real question is, if you purchase an inexpensive tool, how do you get the best use out of it, the best life out of it? And the answer is simple to that. And when you purchase an inexpensive tool, they all have something called a duty cycle, and it may be hard to find on that, but a duty cycle on a very expensive tool, for example, might be 80%. And what that means is that, for example, in the length of an hour, you could use that tool for 80% of the time. So for, say, 45 minutes out of an hour, you could use that tool. An inexpensive tool might have a duty cycle of, say, 10%. And what that means is you could only use that tool for maybe 10 minutes out of an hour, or 7 minutes out of an hour. And what happens with those tools at that time is all tools heat up. And it's the heat is the biggest enemy of any tool. So what you want to avoid, no matter what tool you're using, whether it's a plug-in or a battery operated, you want to make sure that that tool doesn't get hot, especially if it's an inexpensive tool. Drills are a perfect example of that. If you're drilling a lot of holes and you have a plug-in, inexpensive drill and you have a lot of holes to drill, you probably don't want to drill all of them at the same time, depending, of course, on how big the holes are and how deep they are, all sorts of things. What you want to avoid is heating up the tool, because when the tool gets hot, built into almost all of these tools is something called a thermal switch. And that thermal switch will actually stop the tool. And some people think that the tool has quit on them. In some cases it may have, but in other cases it may be just the thermal switch. And if you let that drill or sander or whatever it is, if you let it cool off, very often the switch will unswitch itself and you can use it after the tool has cooled down. But you really don't want to trip those thermal switches, because when you do that, it means you've taken the tool to the very limits of its ability, and you really don't want to be doing that, because eventually that tool is going to fail on you, because they only have so many times that they can do that. And of course a more expensive drill will do it more often than an inexpensive tool. So for example, if you have an inexpensive drill and you're drilling a lot of holes, you'll need to take your time, drill a few at a time, wait for 5 or 10 minutes for the drill to cool off, drill a couple more, and that's how you can extend the life of an inexpensive tool. But there's another thing you need to do. From time to time, when I'm in workshops, I see woodworkers using these kinds of cords as extension cords. This is a lamp extension cord. This is for light bulbs. You never want to use an extension cord like this for a power tool. And the reason is the cords, these are, I believe they're 18 gauge. They're just too thin. It's just a small light gauge extension cord. For power tools, you need a 12 gauge or even a 10 gauge. I believe this is a 10 gauge. I know it looks like a garden hose, it's so thick, but the point is that you need big cables to deliver all the electricity. Otherwise, the tool is working too hard, building up heat, and of course, heat is the biggest enemy of any motor. So what can go wrong with inexpensive tools, and why would they fail? Well, there's a few things that can happen, and often they're heat related. Now, in the old days, we used to have mechanical switches, and if a switch went in a power tool, you could buy a part and replace it. But with newer tools, they have sealed electronic switches, and even if you take these apart, you can't get the parts to replace these, and often you need special parts because they work with the electronics that are built into the power tool. Now, the other thing that can happen is if the motor gets too hot, these very fine wires in here that have insulation around them, they can actually, in some cases, they can actually get so hot that it can melt some of that insulation. And when that happens, of course, it trips, and that's why we have plastic tools now. It can trip something, the switch, a thermal switch or an electronic switch in the tool. And when that happens, the tool is a throwaway. You cannot get parts for these, because they are disposable tools, and you need to keep that in mind. If these fail, take it to the recycling depot and go and purchase another tool, because you cannot fix them and you cannot purchase parts for them. As we all know, we can get inexpensive tools from all sorts of different places. There's an abundance of suppliers out there for inexpensive tools. And as long as we keep in mind those things that I've talked about today, you can get good use out of tools that are inexpensive by being selective on what tools are important to you that are going to be used a lot, and by understanding that when you buy an inexpensive tool, what are the problems that can happen with it and how can you avoid those to get decent life out of that tool. You know, there's lots of reasons that we can purchase inexpensive tools. For example, this is a hammer drill that I purchased a few years ago. I only needed to drill 6 holes in concrete and I didn't have a hammer drill. So I went to my local big box hardware store. I was going to rent a hammer drill. It was $45 to rent the hammer drill. Because I know the guys there, they said, look, we've got one of these on sale for $39. You can take it home, drill your holes and throw it away, and you'll still save some money. So to this day, I still have this hammer drill that I don't use very often, but if I ever need it, I have it. And I've already saved money by buying an inexpensive tool. Now, I have a challenge that I want to put out to everybody watching this video, and that is to ask you to comment and tell me the kinds of things that you would like to see, particularly in this beginner series that we've been doing. We've covered a lot of different aspects, but we'd like to hear from you some of the things that you would like to see that we haven't already covered. So please take a moment and comment and tell us what you would like to see, because that will help us to be able to bring the kinds of programs that are going to be of more value to you. So that concludes our video for today. I'm Colin Canet for Woodworkeb, and thanks in advance for all of your comments.